Good morning. It's Brian. It is the Art of Startup War. Again, you are here. Again, we have a phenomenal entrepreneur. Again, we have invested in this company because we believe it's going to be a huge company and it's going to make a ton of money and it's going to be a unicorn. But actually, that's not the principal reason why I invested. I actually believe this company is going to bring such overdue change to the world, such positive change that I'm just delighted. I'm really looking forward to this chat today with John and talk about BioMirror, talk about like how it's going to actually take the world to a place where at least 50% of the population will say yes already. Right, John?
Absolutely.
So the way we normally do the podcast is and kind of go through the hero's journey, and that hero's journey of, the initial and the turmoil and the tough and the grit and the dirt under your nails and all those things. And every time you get up, you get somebody who stands on your fingers again and you go right back down. And then it comes all the way through to that life-saving moment where Zorro, wins the day and comes through. But before we go on that lovely journey, can you talk a little bit about BioMirror, what it is, talk about the genesis of the concept? How did it come together? And when did you realize that you had something that was truly significant in the world?
Absolutely. But BioMirror on its surface is a product development company in the diagnostics space. That's simplistically what it is. But for us and me and my team, we have a small team. We're spread throughout the country. It's a chance for us to do something meaningful, as you said, with at least half of the population of the world. And this team has been together for decades now. Started off in the early 2000s when we developed a first rapid test for an STD called trichomonas, which is one of the more prevalent STDs in the world. And throughout our journey from that until now, we realized, well, we have the expertise now, after all these years, to do something even larger, also related to trichomonas. It falls in the category of women's health, obviously, but trichomonas and bacteria and yeast all contribute to a condition called vaginitis, which many women in the world suffer from, and many suffer from more than once in their life. And so we really had the opportunity to bring to bear our skill set, and the opportunities to do what we needed to do happened right around now, coincidentally with SARS-CoV-2 pandemic.
Yeah, and by the way, they don't know in many cases that they have it, and in many cases with devastating outcomes.
That's correct. So, a lot of us know the condition of vaginitis, which is the medical term. We think of it, or told to think of it, as yeast infection, right? You just have a yeast infection. And it turns out it's much more complicated than that. There's yeast, as I mentioned, bacteria, and trichomonas. They all contribute to this condition called vaginitis. And the reason why they're grouped together is they can have overlapping symptoms, which makes clinical diagnosis really difficult, about 40% generally. Some places better, some places worse, but it's not ideal is the point. And so the confounding factor here is that we have readily available over-the-counter therapeutics, drugs for yeast infection. And that's what we're told we have. Women are told that they have, rather. You have an issue, it's yeast infection, go just self-medicate. And that's the normal paradigm. And that paradigm hasn't changed in 30, 40 years. It's the same. And this is a problem because you will never have more than one of these organisms infecting you or overgrowing at any given time. And the incidence is roughly evenly split among them. So all of those cases of yeast infection that we think are out there are actually other things.
And that could result in what types of outcomes, that type of misdiagnosis?
That's a great question. So, each of these organisms has their own treatment pathway. So you can't use an antibiotic, against a fungus and vice versa. So if you want good therapeutic outcomes, you need to be able to diagnose it appropriately. But misdiagnosing or even not diagnosing in the case has some severe consequences, including adverse pregnancy outcomes, preterm delivery, stillbirth, even an increased rate of sterility in both men and women. Men suffer from these organisms too, an increased predisposition to HIV infection, as well as an increased incidence of cancer.
Wow.
So it's significant.
It baffles me. Like, with the advancement in science that we have these days, it doesn't seem like a great leap to have been focusing on this many, many years ago. Why do you think there's such a disparity between women's health and men's health in general? Because I feel that there's a lot of solutions out there for men, which was very specifically to them. And it seems like, and I know even from our conversations previously, within women's health, it just seems to be lagging behind massively.
Well, you can have a whole podcast on that subject, to be sure. But I think generally, as we take a look in medicine and even science, women are not greatly represented in those fields. And as a result, studies, drugs, therapies, diagnostic devices, anything that's designed tends to have a male-centric focus. And we in this country tend not to talk about sexual health anyway, just in general. And so when we start talking about, women's related issues, especially reproductive or sexual health issues, we tend to clam up and not deal with it. And why bother anyway, since it's quote unquote just a yeast infection, as we're told, even as men, or and that we have an over-the-counter treatment for this problem. And I think there is an educational component to this. I know that women know that there has to be something better because the amount of suffering that goes on here is palpable. This is an issue that all women deal with, and all you have to do as a male out there is go ask your wife, girlfriend, daughter, friend, mother, it doesn't matter, sister. All women deal with this in some form at some point in their life. And it's unacceptable what we have now.
And so you take a different opinion, right? Your view is you've almost dedicated yourself to women's health. Your team are all female. And it seems like everything you're trying to solve in the world, like I know that you're focusing right now in this one indication, but the idea is to take it way beyond this. You have a vision that goes towards all level of women's health and actually being able to collaborate on a massive global level so that we can start finding these solutions much quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for bringing that up. I mean, just to give you some numbers, for vaginitis alone in the US, there's 120 million cases. That's an estimate. It's probably a little more. That's about 1 billion cases each year in the US. Now, these could be some recurrent cases. Obviously, these are all not new, but there is no way at this moment in time to do a couple of really important things for female health. And I think this will impact us greatly in diagnostics generally. One is we don't talk about how men are contributing to this condition. As I alluded to earlier, men also are affected by these organisms. We just don't have a way to deal with it. Well, we will have a way to deal with it with our approach. And two is we really don't have a way for physicians right now to sort of comprehensively track your vaginitis issues, unless they're really good at taking it down on paper. I mean, how many physicians do you see sort of thumbing through your medical history, and how can they catch anything? So if you're a woman and you have multiple recurrent events throughout your life, it would be nice to know this and have a sort of tailored approach to your treatment. So we want to do this by developing a data platform that allows for data aggregation and analytics so that we can inform those doctors and patients to help them with better care outcomes.
Yeah, it's huge. And we're going to come back into the vision afterwards. But for now, let's even look at you, because I think normally this is when I go directly into the vision and say, how do we build this vision and how do we make it absolutely huge? But I actually want to step back away from the hero's journey and even the vision and look at your background and look at your history so we can show the credibility that sits in here when we're doing this.
Perfect. Well, at the end of the day, I am a scientist. I have always been a scientist. I am the son of a microbiologist, and I like to joke that I effectively grew up in a laboratory. I have done things with my dad when he was a grad student that OSHA would throw fits over. Now, that's a different discussion. But I've been blessed with being surrounded by two parents, my mother and my dad, both who were very committed to healthcare and bettering humanity. My mother was a pediatric AIDS nurse, and my father, as I mentioned, was a researcher, and they really formed my progress as a future scientist. So I became a microbiologist, a virologist actually by training. And then I decided that I really wanted to help bridge the business of science and science. There needed to be somebody who could crosstalk between business. And I think my camera just went off. I'll switch. But anyway.
That's okay. We hear you. We hear you. It's fine.
And so I went, following graduate school, I went and worked at a consulting firm that did product level consulting and helped multinationals prioritize their product portfolio. And that was involved, but that was an incredible experience on how product development was done. And naively thought, I was younger then, that I could do it better. And that basically was all she wrote. I became a serial entrepreneur following that, developing my own diagnostic tests. And it's been that way ever since.
Fantastic. And then your team?
Oh, my team. I have a really small team. We do grow ebb and flow as required, but the core group involves my chief scientific officer, Kathleen, who interestingly is a same class as me in graduate school. She's a phenomenal infectious disease microbiologist and has some wonderful experience to bring to bear. And we have a regulatory expert too, who has been with us since the beginning of, decades ago in our trichomonas test development. And we try to be as nimble as possible by not building brick and mortar business necessarily. We do have our own lab space, but we like to work with development partners who are the best of what they do, and we facilitate that with our expertise. And my favorite anecdote is back in 20 years ago, when I first did my trichomonas test, I went from a meeting in downtown Palo Alto with my business partner to FDA approval in 18 months on 1.3 million. That'd be hard to do today, but we did something similar with SARS-CoV-2 test development. We went from developing our own antibodies to putting it down on an LFA for an EUA submission in 10 months. So we're very good at what we do, and it helps to be a microbiologist in the space.
Yeah, and we're going to get to bridging that gap as well, because I think it's tremendously important. But what investors are listening here today is, number one, this is a huge need. It's half the world, everybody. It's a lot of people. Number two, it is really important. I don't think there's a female or male on the planet that would feel there's any reason in the world that there should not be a clear diagnosis of this. If one child gets lost, it's one child too many. So this needs to be done. And it's not hard when the right people are doing it, such as BioMirror. So for everybody here, I think those things are clear. I think everybody looking at your background, that's really clear as well. Was it difficult to get it to this stage? Like the building, the getting everything, because you make it sound very simple, right? You've an amazing background. You've obviously, been an academic since you were 3, and nobody, I'd say, would have any doubt that you know every single part of the laboratory and what should be put there. But there must have been challenges. There must be times when you think this was not as simple as I thought it was going to be. Can you take us through those early years?
Yeah.
As you were trying to get there?
Well, fortunately, the early years were a lot easier because of naivete, right? So there was a lot of sort of blindly walking into scenarios that I had never done before. And that actually served me well because I wasn't afraid. So I've done my own clinical trials. I've done my own 510K submissions with success. We did our own product development. And now we know better what to do at a sort of a top tier level. And that has made it more challenging in the sense that we're in a highly regulated environment, and we need to be hyper aware of that. And there are two elements, regulated environment and science, that really tends to let people glaze over when you're talking to them. And the biggest challenge for me really is, how do I convey, which is really high concept science, in a way that's simple, that you understand, and believable, and convince you that this is doable. We can do it, but it's just a little bit more complex of a scenario than your average making a widget, but is manageable. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face, is finding that right investment partner who truly understands what we're doing. That's a challenge.
Yeah, and investment partners in general, it's very funny. Everybody wants the valuation of pre-FDA, but nobody is quite certain enough ever to jump in, except for the brave and the smart, before it actually happens, even though that's when the best price is, that's when the valuation is. Look, by the way, once the FDA have said yes, once they're in the shelves and they're in the shops, like, it's not a risk anymore. Nobody needs you at that stage, investor. That's called somebody who just goes onto the stock market and buys and sells stocks, because that's what you're doing. It's at this stage that the spoils are to be made, and especially in wonderful areas like this. But was there ever a doubt in your mind that you were going to develop this?
No. And the reason was, there wasn't a day that we didn't believe that we could develop this, was purely on the development side, the technical side. That I believe every day, because that's what we get as the scientists. Get the chickens in the background.
I love that. Is it a rooster or a chicken?
It's a rooster.
A rooster. Of course, it's a rooster.
I can't help it.
No, it's a beautiful thing. You are in Hawaii.
I am.
You have got the most gorgeous scenery all around you.
No
And the
complaints.
global aspect of what you're doing is absolutely huge.
Yeah.
And you've got the best friends in the world that are roosters.
I appreciate that. Yeah, they contribute to all of my conversations. Apparently, they should be napping. But the biggest challenge we have really is we try to de-risk what a lot of people see as being a risky part of the business development, and that's a challenge to convince people that, especially if you don't understand the regulatory environment or you're not in the science world. That's a big challenge to convince you that we actually know what we're doing.
Yeah, because they're not there, right? It's not
Correct.
there. Like, for me, I'll tell you why I was convinced. Number one, right? Number one, because number one, you've done this before. You know how to do this. You have a phenomenal team around you. You have all of the tools at your disposal to be able to get this done. We know this is not beyond the realm of imagination, that something like this should exist anyway. Correct. There just hasn't been the will and the power behind it to get it done before. Well, there is now. And we also know that there's tremendous profits in this. Also, the really nice thing is, we're not talking about $40-50 million to get this thing developed. We're talking like you throw $1 million at this, which is a tiny amount of money in the venture space, and you can bring this most of the way.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that's partly through efficiencies of what we bring to the table as a team. And that's partly because there are several value inflection points along the way that investment helps us get to. And it's really, really, really critical for us to, get this moving and developed. Yes.
And what does our future development path look like?
Well, we obviously, what we're trying to do here with our test, and I didn't describe it earlier, is we want from a single sample the ability to differentiate what is causing your vaginitis, right? And right now it's kind of guesswork. And yeah, there is a trichomona single test by itself, but being able to differentiate among the causes is absolutely huge for the clinician, for payers, for frankly everybody in the economic chain. And so our ultimate goal, our golden fleece, is to create that dual test. And we've already created over the past, our history is the single test for yeast and a single test for trichomonas. And so now our challenge is to combine them. It's not that challenging, but we've already done the science. We've done the hard work and pulled the hard levers in that sense. But following that, we need to figure out how our test doesn't just become one of many diagnostic attempts vying for the same market space. And quite frankly, I think that is through the management of the information, the data that these tests tell us. We want ultimately to be the intel inside for clinical data management, especially for at-home testing. That's going to be key. And what I like to say when I'm talking about this is, imagine what we could have done differently, in theory, if we had real-time data or aggregation as we were doing at-home testing for SARS-CoV-2. Tremendously powerful and imminently doable. But we're all, as diagnostics companies, so focused on our individual silo and technology that we're dumping our money into marketing and sales so we can convince you, the public, or whoever the customer is, to buy our tech versus their tech.
Yeah,
and we need a way to bring this together.
So interesting, like building that collaborative network, because logically it makes perfect sense. Now, the more data that you collect, the more information that you have to make better decisions, right? And especially if that data is real and it's going real time. And you've started it by saying, look, what women don't want to do is do 10 different tests to tell them what they don't have, right? They just want to do a test to tell them what they do have. And then you want to then expand that out so that you're covering a multitude of different areas, which are, again, really important. And the more you make that platform, and I think really what you're almost looking at is an app store for all diagnostics, right?
Think about it this way, Brian.
How huge is that? Like an app store for all diagnostics. It's insane.
Absolutely. It's unbelievable, because what we have right now, if you were to tell us, oh, well, we also want a test for preeclampsia. Let's just pretend it doesn't exist, right? But we want to do this at home, and we want BioMirror to do it. Well, that's a whole development process in itself, right? That takes the same amount of effort. It's an amazing amount of effort, which we can't do. We can't do serial test building like that, and unless I want to live, doing this into my hundreds. So what we want to do is we want all of those awesome diagnostic companies out there to develop their test and realize that they can just port it into our system or a system, right, where their data gets captured, and they can decide who gets to see it. Whether it's the patient or the physicians, the payers, policy health makers, it doesn't matter, but they need a way for this data to be meaningful.
Yeah.
And that's what I think is missing from the diagnostic
And
landscape.
I think what's very interesting from a public perception perspective is that folks don't realize with diagnostics, moving on to like full drug development, they don't realize the true cost and length of time it takes to do these things. Like to develop a drug itself might take 10, 12 years and it will cost you $4 or $5 billion. And that's why it was so interesting when people are saying, well, I don't understand. We just get this COVID thing and why don't we just create a vaccine? Like how hard can it be? Well, I'll tell you how hard it is. It's about $4 billion hard and it's about 10 years hard. And the fact that they got it done in a year and a half, 2 years, doesn't mean it cost less than $4 billion. It probably cost a lot more than $4 billion because they did it in less time. So there has to be a smarter way than everybody working in a silo, developing that small little thing, which goes alongside the other 3,000 small things that are being developed for everybody else.
Absolutely. And, we recognize the need for this larger collaborative effort. I get that. But, part of the problem with disruptive technologies or new technologies is, there are a lot of doubters perhaps, or haters or whatever. And I think that's where we offer a good bet into this space because we're coming out with a test that basically is addressing potentially half the world's population. And if you include men, the entire world's population.
Right.
And then we're going to use that as our platform to validate the information that comes from those diagnostics. Because we're not talking about, if you misdiagnose somebody, there's a fatal event tomorrow. There is some forgiveness here with the system, which is why it's been able to persist like this for some time. And so that really gives us the ability to really build out a system that's meaningful for not just us, but for lots of other groups.
And I really love how you're building $1 billion company as a Trojan horse to build $1 trillion company.
we just really want to help people at the end of the day. That's what we would like to do. And I do recognize that, impact translates into monetary value. I get that, especially in this country. So we're not adverse to that at all, but we are driven to make as big an impact as possible. And that, of course, will translate into sales. It has no...
And look, and I argue that impact turns into monetary value, and monetary value, when dealt with properly, turns into more impact.
Absolutely.
Like look whether we argue that the Gates, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, do perfect projects or imperfect projects. Mm-hmm. The fact that they're spending billions of dollars all over the world making an effort to make the world a better place is only possible because of the enormous impact that comes from what they sold before, right?
Absolutely. No question.
And if we can take, and I say we now because we're an investor in the company. Yeah, right. So if we can take something which is not just a discomfort, but something which leads to devastating death amongst children, then this is something that everybody in the world wants to fix. Mom, dads, everybody, we all want to fix that. And it's something that people will, it's not even a conversation piece. I'm a huge fan. My investment thesis is real simple. It's look, if we can avoid it, if there's something, so first of all, like all venture capitalists, we have to provide a return to our limited partners, or we're not venture capitalists for very long, right? And then so sitting within that thesis is, how do we want to be defined in the future? Like, what difference did we make in the world? Were we the same venture capitalists and everything else? So whilst getting a great return for our investors, how do we want to be seen? So for me, to be able to take incredible founders who have a proven track record and who have got an epic insight, as our friend John McDonald said, something that the world is ready for, but they haven't seen it yet. But it's possible, but only just. But there was maybe never another time that it would have been possible. It's almost like, if we go back to our science fiction movies, it's that time hole that you have, that you step into, that it's only there for 5 minutes. Or Doctor Who days, that is then going to go away immediately afterwards. I feel like you have that right now. We're at this time in the world where what you're putting together is massively impactful. It's also possible for you to be able to do it. You have the team to be able to do it. You have the methodology to get to market with only, as I said, $1 million to be able to break through and get this thing through. And then you have this beautiful ability to be able to bring much greater change through the greater mission and the greater vision that you're doing. That to me is exciting. As a general partner in a fund, and as making sure my LP is taken care of, that's where the money is.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's really that trajectory, that vision that keeps us, getting up during the hardest of times, because we know what that impact looks like. That's why we do it.
So then let's take it here. I think the investors get the product, they get the opportunity, they get the vision, they get where it's going to go, and they also get your incredible background, which anybody listening to this podcast should absolutely check out. I mean, go in, we'll make sure that you have John's contact details as well and my contact details too, so that you can do it. But when you look at the background, you'll be like, of course, this is going to get done, because it's always got done in the past. But one area I just want to be very specific on is the getting this to market. Right? We know the market are going to take it when it comes. Like, it's a no-brainer. It's the only one that does both at the same time. So that part of it's done. It's the from now to the getting it to market that we want to make sure that investors that are listening into this become as certain as I was that it's actually going to get there. So can we just talk through that? Talk through what January looks like, and January 22 looks like, in February and March and April and May, and how it's going to iterate its ways through to the end of the year to get not just approval, but also, access to market.
So there are 3 silos that we have to address simultaneously, and there are actually 4 being the sort of business development one, but we'll get to that one. The 3 silos come January, or day 1 post-investment, is we have a regulatory component. So as soon as we're off to the races, we are already in communication with the FDA. There's a pre-submission happening, and that sets us up for the eventual 510K. There are no surprises. We're working with the FDA. They love this. We love this. And we have a regulatory path. That's one silo. The second silo to getting us to market is the actual product development.
Can I just just to stop you for a second. On the regulatory path, how challenging is that going to be, do you expect? I mean, and maybe talk a little bit about the 510, and also, maybe the conversations you've had so far. Some, not just the easy parts to get there, but maybe also some of the challenging parts to get there too.
Well, let's talk about what's known, and then we'll talk about what's not known. The known part for us is we know the pathway to get to a 510K, which is the process by which we submit our device or diagnostic to be approved. And in order for us to get best outcomes, we initially talk with them as soon as we can by providing them a document called a pre-submission. It's basically a mini version of that ultimate 510K. So it's a lot of work up front for us to do that. We do have constant communications with them, with the FDA and the particular division that is relevant for us, to ensure that we're not running afoul of anything or thinking about things the wrong way. There are standards within our field, so that does guide us. We have to worry about making sure that we have a company registration with the FDA. There are all sorts of ISO regulations that we have to follow for manufacturing. It's complicated, but if you've been in it, like I have for a couple decades, and my regulatory person even longer, then it becomes really manageable. And we also do this. We expect, Brian, that we are going to be audited by the FDA. Every company regulated by the FDA should expect to be audited by them. And I absolutely want to make sure that we minimize that risk by making sure that our documentation is top of the line. So we have our own internal quality management systems. We have our own document control. A lot of companies our size don't. And we choose to put efforts into that so we minimize that risk as we approach a 510K. So everything is in order. And we want to provide shareholders and potential product acquirers or even company purchasers the comfort that these guys know what they're doing. And that's frankly, it's a difficult but easy way to do it, if you know what I mean.
Great.
The challenges are, we don't know what the FDA is going to do now thanks to SARS-CoV-2. I think it's going to become a little bit more regulated with rapid tests like ours. But that's across the board. Everybody will be equal on that. They opened the floodgates to rapid testing, and now they're beginning to pull back a little. And it will be interesting to see what that pullback looks like. So that's an unknown at this moment. We do participate regularly with FDA calls, and so we have a good sense of what that might look like. So that's the regulatory pillar. On the product development side, this is the heavy science side. This is the most difficult one to explain, because we're dealing with actual biologicals. We have cells that make antibodies, and we have to do certain things to make sure that they are GMP manufacturable. So there is some analysis that we have to do, and then there's some physical chemistry that we have to do, and to take those antibodies and put it on a physical substrate like paper, for example. And that's complex, but we've done this before. We know all the questions asked. We've just done this before. That's just the easy way to say it. Otherwise, it's just too complex.
Yeah.
And then the third component, the third silo is clinical. That's our clinical silo. Because to get to a 510(k) submission, we have to demonstrate clinical utility. And again, this is the power of our group. We all have that experience in writing clinical protocols, engaging clinical sites, managing clinical trials, analyzing the data to put into that 510(k). And the truth of the matter is our device is a class 1. It's the lowest complexity. It's CLIA waivable. These are all conscientious decisions. I don't want to deal with a more complex device. That just takes too much money and it's too long. That's for the bigger boys to deal with. We have a space and this is our space. And then the final component of this, which also happens in parallel, which is what we are engaging through with this dojo, the dojo process, is we are defining who our eventual customers might be or will be and how that's going to grow. And that's what I get to do in my role as my team is doing the regulatory and the product development. And that's what we do day one. It's a pretty heavy lift, but it's fun.
Yeah, but it's actually, it is and it isn't, right? Because when you've done the lift 20 or 30 times, like the lift is known. And and things are only heavy lifts actually when you reach down and you try and pick it up and you don't know how much it weighs. When you know how much it weighs, you prepare yourself for how much it weighs and you do the lift, right? So you're there. The other reason I don't see it as a crazy heavy lift is that we're not talking 5 years or 7 years out here. Like there are medical devices, stroke drugs, stroke therapeutics, stroke diagnostics that literally you got a 10-year window. It's just like, here's the deal. Come back to me in 2030 and I'm going to have it. In this case, we're talking about a year, 2 years, like to get to a place at least where we have like massive visibility as to where this is going to go. So we are about as close as you could possibly be at the most reasonable possible valuation that you could imagine as an investor. Like I genuinely, I'm saying I'm an investor, so I'm not a promoter. I genuinely don't believe there is a better fit of timing to full 100% certainty of sales, which is only when sales happened, stroke valuation of company today and the risk cycle that actually goes with that. I think you're on that perfect time for an investor to be able to come into it, which is absolutely fantastic. What else do we need to cover here? Because I suppose maybe one of the things, my final area that I would love to maybe just get across to everybody here is in an area of value. So if you look at similar type companies, fully developed, out there in the market, either with 1 or 2 diagnostics, like what can this become? And again, all investors know, I'll put a caveat before I say it, all investors know that we're talking about competitors here or we're talking about comparisons. We're not saying that the company's definitely going to get here. We're just saying that this is where we assume logically is not an unreasonable number to talk about considering it's being done, stroke has been done.
And you're talking about valuation specifically, correct?
I'm talking about, yes, exactly.
So this is actually quite a complex question to try to answer. And it's primarily because we carry with us a lot of history. If you go back 10 years, maybe even 5 years, if you were to go down Sand Hill Road and ask, what do you think about diagnostic companies? And I've heard this more than once. Well, diagnostics is a wasteland. It was really second to the top of the pyramid, which were pharmaceuticals, right? Now, if anything, this past 2 years has taught us is you can't manage a disease without a diagnostic. It is the key. And even as we have drugs that are being developed, Pfizer's announcement today, for example, with their new protease inhibitor, you still need a companion diagnostic. I'm hoping beyond hope that that's what SARS-CoV-2 has taught us is the importance of diagnostics. And I think so, because there has been an explosion of interest in the diagnostic space. Now, one of the trends that I'm seeing is not necessarily an explosion in innovation, but it's more explosion in access. So we have a lot of companies like HIMSS and others that are providing customers with tests that we weren't able to have before at home. It's not truly at-home testing. You still have to sample and send it off to a lab to be interpreted, but the access is different. So the answer to your question is, my gosh, it ranges in terms of valuation and really does depend on what's your market. What is the market size? And part of me struggles with this answer because we are legitimately talking about hundreds of millions of women in this country, or events rather, in this country alone. How do you value that? I don't really know. And I look forward to your expertise on helping me walk through that because it's a difficult equation to navigate.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
Listen, it's been fantastic. It's always great chatting. As I said, I've said it like 10 times now in the podcast. It's such a pleasure having you in the cohort. I love being a part of this company. I love what you're doing for the world. I think whether you're a female investor or male investor, like a lot of the times, if we've something that's very focused on females, I'll be like, females, you should get in there. Women, you should be supporting this. I don't even say that now. I'm saying men, women, for God's sake. It's like everybody. This is one of those things that's just silly and it should never happen. And now you have a phenomenal company with a tremendous background and amazing expertise that's about to get a product to market, which is going to have a market size of 50% of the entire population of the world. So hello, it's important. And by the way, all of whom are affected by it at some stage in their life, or pretty much all of them. So I just cannot speak highly enough of what you're doing. I give a higher recommendation of a founder or a company in my knowledge of certainty that that company is going to break through. So for all those things, it's great. Can you share your email and then just any final words that you have for our audience?
Sure. My email is John, JOHN, at biomirrordx.com, BIOMIRRORDX.com. And you know what? We are in a golden age, I think, of healthcare and innovation right now. And I can't thank you enough for having the vision to recognize this and really setting standards for how investment groups are going to need to think about investing as we move towards a more healthcare-centric economy. I have to believe that. So thank you for your time, Brian. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. That is a wrap.